It's something else.
Okay, so let me ask you a question about that. So this is a three-pronged question, let's say.
Okay, yes.
It seems to me that there's a high probability that the future is actually indeterminately different than the present and the past, that it's actually unpredictably different.
Oh, this is a different question.
Yeah,
now you're talking about determinism.
Yes. But I think it seems to me that it's tied to this idea that computation can be complete and algorithmic. I don't think it can be, because if the future differs in a fundamental manner, an unpredictable manner from the present or the past, then a deterministic algorithmic system can't maintain a grip on the horizon of the future. And I have another part of that question.
But it's a different question. So I think it's important to distinguish these things.
Yes.
Because up to this point, I was not talking about indeterminism.
No.
I was talking about rules. Well, just yes or no. And I mean, it's not a question of maybe or. I mean, it isn't even talking about the laws of physics at this stage. That's the second step, if you like.
I guess I leapt forward to something like the potential necessary function of consciousness. So, because one of the things consciousness seems to do from a neurophysiological perspective, for example, we tend to become conscious of our procedural errors. And so consciousness becomes alerted to the errors and then zeroes in on the source of the error in some sense and corrects it. And so it looks to me like it's something like a correction system for underlying algorithmic systems. So, for example, if you practice a motor routine for a long time, you build specialized algorithmic machinery in your brain that runs it. But maybe you've put in an error. You're playing a difficult piano phrase, for example, and you stumble over a note. You've automatized that. You play it and you listen and you hear the anomaly, which is the error. Your consciousness focuses in on that. A large brain area will activate as a consequence of becoming aware of that error. Then when you practice the new routine that's corrected, the brain area will shrink and shrink and shrink until it's a small part of the brain, usually in the back of the left hemisphere. And now you've built another automated machine to play out that phrase. And consciousness, I think it was Whitehead who said that at least the purpose of consciousness, although he might have used thought, was to increase the number of things that we can do without consciousness or thought. But it seems to be this horizon phenomena. And the reason I was asking about the indeterminacy of the future was twofold, is that if the future is deterministic, then an algorithmic system could in principle adapt to it. But it doesn't seem to me that the future can be predictable, and I think that might be grounded in something like quantum indeterminacy, because there isn't a fundamental determinism that propagates all the way up. So,
well, you see, I mean, we have to. The things I was talking about up to this point were not to do. They weren't even to do with the laws of physics, so that's a separate question. I mean, it did relate to that, which is my own views certainly did depend on that, but. The question of determinism is a separate issue. And the normal way we look at quantum mechanics is it does involve an indeterminism, which you can have a theory which does that too. But that's different, you see. If it's just indeterministic, it's not connected. You see, the Gödel argument is to do with things where you have definite rules, you can check whether these rules have been followed or not. And the question is whether it coincides with your understanding about what things are true or false in mathematics. Mm-hmm. So that's what it's to do with. Now, you see, you can question how you move from that into other aspects of what consciousness does. And also the question you were referring to is whether something's automatic, and pianists can play things, and obviously where the little finger goes next is not something that he or she decides to do. It's all largely controlled by the cerebellum, probably, which, as far as we know, is entirely unconscious. So the greater number of neurons in the brain, which are in the cerebellum, seem not to be acting according to conscious actions at all. It's something completely unconscious.
Right. Well, yes, that's a very strange thing that, people make the case as well that there's some simple relationship between neuronal function and consciousness. But as you pointed out, The cerebellar activity doesn't seem to be conscious at all. And then
Yeah.
there's a tremendous amount of neurons in your autonomic nervous system distributed throughout your body. And there may be some consciousness associated with that, but it's not particularly acute. And most of the time, it's entirely unconscious. And the autonomic nervous system is running your digestive system and your heart and all of these inner automated systems. And it's interesting, too, because often becoming consciously aware of a highly functional unconscious system actually impairs its function rather than improving it.
That could be, yeah, sure. I'm not quite sure what this tells us about consciousness. It just tells us certain things are not conscious, which are controlled by neurons in the brain, and so it's a different issue.
Right.
May I just jump in to ask Sir Roger if you would say a word or two more about why it is that consciousness cannot be reduced simply to mechanistic processes?
Well, you see, I'm very careful to say I'm not talking about consciousness in all its aspects.
Yes.
For example, I have nothing to say about the perception of the color green, for instance. Sure, there's something going on which makes green have a certain impression on one. But this is not what I'm talking about. And probably most of the things that we think about when we talk about consciousness are not what I'm talking about. So I'm only talking about a very specific part of what consciousness does. And the argument is that if this is something which is not a computational process, then it sort of sheds a question mark on the whole thing. But it's only very specific to the question of understanding. So I tend to make that point clear. And understanding is something which, certainly in the normal usage of the word, implies conscious. You wouldn't say of a device normally that it understands something without it being aware of something. And aware means being conscious of it. So that's just normal usage, and I'm going along with that. So I don't know what most of these words mean, but I would say that understanding is something which requires consciousness.
Yes, is one way into this to speak about, so much of our thinking, of course, is calculative. There's a goal there. We're calculating how to get to it. So there's a huge amount of life that is like that. But to then ask the question about why this is a goal, or why this is worthy of being a goal, or what would make it worthy of being a goal, or what would make that worthy of being a justification for that to be a goal, the kinds of thinking that you have to engage in order to reflect upon the nature of the ends and purposes, is distinct from the kinds of thinking you engage in to calculate your way to a goal. And that seems to point towards the realm, or a kind of thinking or awareness that is clearly distinct from a simply mechanistic calculation.
Yes. I certainly wouldn't disagree with that. It's just that it's hard to know whether those things could be put into a computational system. Mm-hmm. The reason for concentrating on this very specific area is that I can say something about it, that's all. Mm-hmm. So the particular area is mathematical proof. I see most people don't bother themselves with mathematical proof, and they're conscious too. So I'm certainly not saying that's an indicator of consciousness. I'm saying it is something which requires consciousness, but I'm completely accept that there are all sorts of other aspects of consciousness which are going on all the time and which are much more important. I've gone along with that too. But it's just that if you can find something in what consciousness seems to do which is demonstrably not computational, that's saying something. And that's the limited little thing I'm trying to say.
Now,